Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's PENTalk. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them through the question box. We'll answer as many questions at the end as time allows. If we don't get to your question today, we will follow up with you afterwards. Tomorrow, you will receive an email with a link to replay today's broadcast. Let's get started. Hosting today is Kate Blake, Instructional Designer and Technology Trainer at Pentegra. Kate has been with us since the beginning of her career, where she started in the retirement benefits field. Kate is going to provide an overview of retirement plan trends that could be on the horizon for 2025. Kate, I will now hand things off to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Noelle, and thank you everybody for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. I know it is very cold where I am calling in from today here in New York, so if you live in an area that is also cold, or if you happen to be in the South experiencing some snow, perhaps for the first time, I hope that you are staying warm and toasty and enjoying whatever old man winter brings your way. But since we're all stuck inside today and this week, what better time to talk about retirement trends for 2025? Now, there's a lot on the horizon. A lot is swirling around about Secure 2.0. So we've chosen 5 topics that we think have relevance both to the clients that we work with and provide opportunities for us as retirement plan practitioners to add value to those clients. So I want to highlight them for you today. We'll start with a look at automatic enrollment provisions and what's going on with that in terms of the requirements, best practices, and some new proposed regulations that are hot off the presses. Then we'll take a little bit of a zoom out and talk about Secure 2.0 in general. We'll look at voluntary versus required provisions, and we'll also talk about amendment timing. Startup plans and plan mandates are something that we're really seeing gaining traction across the country. So we wanted to highlight some of both the challenges and the opportunities with those mandates. We'll take a look at cybersecurity. We'll take specifically the DOL's 3 points of light, which are 3 really useful documents released by the DOL that provide succinct cybersecurity guidance for 3 different scenarios that we'll talk about. And that is a great discussion item to have when we meet with clients and do annual plan reviews and things of that nature. So I'll tell you where you can not only understand, but find those documents so you can bring them to your client meetings. And one of the things that we've seen really expand in terms of usage and regulation over the last, say, 10 to 15 years is the Roth arena, the Roth contribution source. So we'll take a look at that as well. Kicking it off, let's begin with automatic enrollment. Now, specifically, I would really like to talk about EACA today. Now, there are several different types of automatic enrollment, as many of you are probably already aware, but eligible automatic contribution arrangements are required for certain new retirement plans with the passage of Secure 2.0. So that's where that came about. And that is starting in the 2025 plan year. So if you work with clients, especially new plans, this is something that may be impacting some of them. And I think that this is worth highlighting because, number one, EACA has some administrative nuances just in general. Number two, because the EACA provisions now apply again to new businesses under Secure 2.0, new businesses typically are wearing a lot of hats. They're doing a lot of things. They may not always be on the up and up about that nuance, which is why I wanted to mention it today. And then I also want to talk about some best practices. But first, some details. So EACA, if you're not already aware, this is the one where new hires will be automatically enrolled if no affirmative election is made on the participants, if the participant takes no action. So affirmative action is a word or a phrase that we can define, and it has significance when we're talking about EACA. Affirmative election means the employee chooses a deferral amount or opts out of the plan entirely and does not make contributions. Absent an affirmative election, participants are going to be enrolled automatically into the plan. You can see under item 2 here, there is a default starting deferral percentage, and that's going to be anywhere between 3 and 10% depending on the plan's provisions. And then there's going to be an auto escalation, as you can see under item 3, going to a maximum of between 10 and 15%. So if we think about this logically and we put ourselves in our client's shoes, and I'm a new business and I've, just hung my shingle out the front door, and all of a sudden I want to sponsor a retirement plan and I have to have auto enrollment, and it has a 90-day refund policy and auto escalation and all these provisions attached to it. Again, that might be something that I might not necessarily want to deal with as a small business or a new business. That's where we can add value as retirement plan practitioners, because the best practice, if you have clients who look at this and say, ugh, this is regulatory burden, this is going to keep me from doing my day job. I'm going to go back one slide. This is where the third bullet point becomes key, that affirmative election. So if you have clients who are subject to these provisions and they're thinking this is too much for me, have them encourage employees to make an affirmative election when they're hired and come on board. Because again, if an employee makes an affirmative election in one of these plans that has this IACA provision, then they're not going to be subject to all of this detailed nuance. So when you do annual plan reviews with clients and you talk about auto enrollment, you can let them know, get affirmative election from participants or employees when they're hired. That way, again, you don't have to necessarily worry about this nuance. Now, to be fair, sometimes it's difficult to get affirmative election. It doesn't solve the situation entirely. It doesn't mean that clients don't have to offer IACA or have it in their plan if they're subject to it under the regs. But it is a way to keep the operation of the plan a little bit cleaner, so to speak, for an employer who may not have the resources to, or desire to deal with these provisions. But again, be aware that it is required now beginning in 2025. As you can see here, there are some exceptions to which employers have to have this provision. And that was actually clarified about 2 weeks ago. On January 10th, the Treasury Department and IRS released proposed regulations. So this is hot off the presses, and if folks are interested, feel free to post in the chat box. We'd love to hear from you. If people would like to have another webinar or hear more information on the January 10th proposed regs, we can certainly do that, because that goes into more detail about who has to have IACA. There are some exemptions for employers who've been around for less than 3 years. Those proposed regs from January 10th also clarified which types of employees this applies to. Specifically, the proposed regs clarified that these provisions do apply to long-term part-time employees, and they also provided guidance for rehires. So important to know that this is happening, and also important to know that this is an actively evolving situation, and anybody who handles these plans should become familiar with those proposed regs from January 10th. So that's a specific piece of Secure 2.0. I wanted to highlight it individually just because, again, it's coming online this year. It has implications not only for clients, but for participants as well. And again, the proposed regs just came out, so I felt it deserved an individual shout out. But I do want to zoom out and talk about Secure 2.0 in general, because as I mentioned before, there's 2 types of provisions. There's the mandatory provisions, and then there's the voluntary provisions. And I want to give you my take on adoption. I also want to talk about amendment timing, because I'm sure that's a question that's coming up from clients a lot. And just general best practices around implementation. So a couple of important mandatory provisions that I just wanted to draw everybody's attention to. The RMD age has kicked up again. Now we're up to age 73. I also wanted to point out that there has been a change under Secure 2.0 to RMD sources. So Roth is now excluded from RMD requirements and employer-sponsored plans while the participant is still living. This brings the Roth 401k provisions into a sort of similar state as the Roth IRA provisions in terms specifically of RMDs. So a little streamlining is happening there from my perspective. Also, keep an eye on catch-up contributions. A higher catch-up contribution limit applies for employees age 60, 61, 62, and 63 who participate in certain employer-sponsored plans, including 401k and 403b plans. For 2025, this higher catch-up contribution limit is $11,250 instead of the regular $7,500. Why is this important? Well, because the standard catch-up limit is age 50 or above. So this is an enhanced catch-up limit, but only specifically for those ages. Maybe something worth mentioning to record keepers if you happen to be in contact with the folks who handle the books of business of the record keepers you do business with, just to make sure that every record keeper that you work with is ready to accommodate this provision for 2025. They should be, but it is a change. And we should also make sure, as we do our annual plan reviews, that clients are aware of this increased limit as well. And we should be communicating it in our education efforts to participants. Not everybody's going to be able to reach this enhanced match. But for those who can, it can be really beneficial. Now, these are required provisions. These have kicked in. We are required to administer our plans in compliance with them. I mention that specifically because there is a whole host of voluntary provisions that could potentially be adopted under Secure 2.0 as well. I'll give you some examples. Matching contributions that can potentially be made on a Roth basis, student loan repayment matching contributions, and emergency savings accounts. If you have any clients who are interested in adopting voluntary provisions, this is my recommendation to you. I would first reach out to those record keepers who work with the plans just to make sure that they have the capacity to administer these voluntary provisions. Again, a lot of these are new, really hot off the presses. Different TPAs and record keepers may administer plans in different ways. A plan document may provide for a voluntary provision when the amendment language is available, but if a record keeper can't administer it, then we have a problem. So the message really, if there's one takeaway here, is before we go into any of our annual plan reviews or client meetings this year, or before we do any sort of, prospecting or anything like that, make sure that we as practitioners, advisors, sales folks, account managers, make sure that we are all on the same page with what our record keepers can offer. Because the worst scenario is if we say to a client, oh, yeah, we want to recommend, that you implement emergency savings accounts, and then we turn to the record keeper and they say, oh, we can't accommodate that. So always make sure that we check feasibility of any voluntary provisions first before recommending them to clients. And keep in mind amendment timing. There's a lot going on right now in terms of amendments and plan documents. I'm sure some of your clients are asking where Secure 2.0 amendments are now that we're required to comply with a lot of these new provisions. It's important to let them know that the amendment deadline for Secure 2.0 is not until 12/31/2026. Why? Third bullet point, and as we just saw, this allows the IRS time to release guidance on unclear regulation. Like with the EACA provisions, we didn't initially know whether or not they would apply to long-term part-time employees. They do. The January 10th guidance clarified that. But that's why there's usually such a long lag between legislation and when the plans are amended for it. We get guidance from the IRS and other regulatory agencies, Then we need time for document vendors to update their language and time to circulate those amendments to clients so that they can take action and sign them and make them effective. All of that takes time. I mention this, though, because when many of us meet with our clients and we talk about implementing these provisions and being in operational compliance, the natural next question the clients ask is, well, where are the docs? So this is the answer. It takes time. 12/31/2026 is our deadline. It's also worth mentioning, if you do have these conversations with clients, that our plans have not yet reached the amendment deadline for Secure 1.0 either. So the Secure 1.0, which was the original legislation back in 2019, that amendment deadline is actually at the end of this year, 12/31/2025. That effective date was pushed back several times and is finally approaching. So when clients ask about this stuff, Secure 2.0, tell them it's a ways in the future, but later this year we can expect our Secure 1.0 amendments. And then next year, we'll amend for Secure 2.0. This is important too because especially for plans who have to restate, I think some 403B plans may be in the middle of a restatement process. Those restated documents, in all likelihood, not in all likelihood for sure, are not going to include Secure 2.0 provisions. Why? Again, because the IRS is still releasing guidance, we're still waiting for model language, et cetera, et cetera. So even if you have a 403B plan who, say, is restating a document this year, it still will have to be amended later on for Secure 2.0, just because of the way the workflow is arranged. Back when I used to work with clients, that was one of the biggest questions that I used to repeatedly get. Where are the amendments? Why is it taking so long? What's wrong with you guys? You're slow. It's not that the vendors are slow, it's that there is the process in place. I think sometimes letting clients know that proactively really goes a long way towards building trust and helping them understand the way the flow of the plan document process works. In terms of startup plans, as I mentioned, this is something that is gaining traction nationwide, and this is from a presentation we did last year that I really wanted to share with you because I think this illustrates the extent to which we are starting to see state-sponsored retirement plan mandates. So basically, in a nutshell, if it's blue, they do not yet have a mandate. But if there's two colors blue, it's hard to kind of tell the difference. Everything except for South Dakota and Alabama, just to make it easy for you guys, color-wise, every blue state aside from those two have had some recent efforts to launch a state mandate. And by recent efforts, I mean at some point in the last, say, decade or so. So even in the blue states where we don't have a mandate yet, there are rumblings. And then you can see all the other colors do have some sort of a mandate, or for some of our green ones, at least a proposal in place or a study commissioned. For those who do have mandates in place, if we take a look, we see a lot of the red. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I live in the frigid tundra of New York. We have an auto IRA program here in New York, and you can see that is a very popular option among the states that do have mandates. Why? Probably because it's a little bit simpler than a full-blown 401k plan, both for the participants and for the employers, many of whom are new businesses, small businesses. So it's a way for them to get a plan going without necessarily having to expend the effort, energy, and expense associated with a standard 401k plan. That has upsides and downsides, though, as you can see here. You know, as you're having conversations with businesses who are impacted by state mandates, it's important to keep these benefits and costs in mind. I think there's a lot of benefits to state mandates. It gets new savers in the retirement plan system, which leads to increased retirement accumulations and better retirement readiness for our populace as a nation. which in turn could reduce reliance on social programs. But when you're talking to small businesses and new businesses and plan participants, those are sort of existential benefits. They may or may not necessarily understand the value there. And that's where we come in. That's where we can help provide the education and provide the guidance to businesses who are impacted by this mandate so that they can enact these plans in a smart way and in a way that it really allows their employees to maximize them. There are some negatives associated with the state-mandated plans. Some schools of thought believe that because states pick up the cost, there are concerns that private plans may sunset in favor of the state picking up the overall tab. Most of these state-mandated plans, I would say the vast majority, do not have any sort of matching contribution or any sort of non-employee contribution. So if we did go to a system overall that is more dominated by state-mandated plans, that lack of, additional profit sharing or match or what have you could lead to lower account balances than we would otherwise see in your traditional 401k plan. And just expanding along that line of thought, without that, say, matching contribution, there's less of an incentive for employees to save in these plans unless they're mandated to do so. See the EAC, a conversation that we had at the beginning of this webinar. And as I mentioned before, most of these states, all the ones in red on that prior slide, use an auto IRA program where the limits are not as high as traditional 401k plans. But I think overall the upsides outweigh the downsides, because when you look at the facts and figures, we have a savings problem in this country. And when you really break it down, the folks at the lower end of the spectrum are really the folks who are in need of the most help just getting started, because they may not have the knowledge necessary. So from that perspective, an auto IRA program may be a great fit. They don't have to make a lot of decisions about who, what, where, why that would apply in a 401k plan, and it at least gets them going. Topic number 4 is cybersecurity. This is by far my favorite topic of the 5, which I know sounds incredibly nerdy, but my big takeaway here from this is that there are 3 important documents that you can download and have on hand for your client meetings, and I really recommend them because they're very nicely put together and they lay out everything that we need to think about in terms of cybersecurity, which is a critical topic these days. Those 3 documents are available on the DOL website. You can Google DOL 3 points of light, and you will find these 3 documents: tips for hiring a service provider, cybersecurity program best practices, and online security tips. Why did I include this on my roundup of hot topics for 2025? Because the DOL is starting enforcement of some of these actions. What do I mean by that? Well, let's look at tips for hiring a service provider. This document talks about things like keeping records of service provider audits, IT standards, the track record of your service providers, remedies that your service providers have taken to handling past issues, and how you, as an advisor, a retirement plan sponsor, or practitioner, how you document these issues or help your clients document them. And what do I mean by the DOL has started enforcement? They are starting to ask retirement plan sponsors, show me your cybersecurity best practices policies. What are you doing to mitigate risk in terms of cybersecurity? And we should ensure that all of our clients are able to give a plan of action back to the DOL should they ask for that information. These documents are designed to do just that. I just gave you a couple of ideas of things that this document lays out, but what you can do is you can get together with your clients and you can go through this with them, and you can just tick the boxes, write down the document, and just talk about all the different things that you need to have in place and considerations when dealing with retirement assets in the 21st century. That's just one of three. So that document is for managing service providers. So you're a plan sponsor, you have a record keeper, you have a TPA, you have an advisor. How do you work with these folks and how do you manage what they're doing? The second document, which we're looking at here, is for plan record keepers and other service providers. So flip the coin. Now, I'm a record keeper, I'm a TPA. What do I do to keep my business strong for my clients? So here we talk about documenting cybersecurity programs, assigning roles and responsibilities for that program, and how to conduct annual risk assessments. And the last one is online security tips for plan participants. Now, this one talks about the things that a lot of us are familiar with already, but many of our plan participants, especially, again, those ones who've been auto-enrolled or maybe the ones who are in because of a state mandate, they may not be familiar with these topics. It talks about things like MFA, creating strong passwords, like using a passphrase and things of that nature. So if you have not had a conversation with your clients recently about cybersecurity, it is a critical topic. It is one the IRS is turning an eye to in 2025 and beyond. And a great way to start that conversation is by bringing these three documents to your next client meeting. And the last topic we had today are Roth contributions. I just wanted to call this out because back when I started in the retirement plan industry, Roth was it was new to retirement plans, and most employers didn't have them. Now, over the last 10, 15 years, we've seen the majority of employers add Roth sources, but now we're starting to see what I call the Rothification of certain retirement plan provisions. What do I mean by that? Again, I mentioned it earlier in the first bullet point. Roth 401k balances are now exempt from RMD requirements for plan participants while they are living. That's a change. Effective 1/1/2026, catch-up contributions for certain higher earners must be made to a Roth source. That's going to be new too. So just a lot of new things happening around Roth. A voluntary secure 2.0 provision. Match can now be made on a Roth basis if a plan opts into that voluntary provision. So all this to say, I put this in here because I think that this is a source and a space that we should keep an eye on because there's a lot of change afoot when it comes to Roth, and I suspect we might see more in the future. So where do we go from here? How do we turn this into actionable things that we can do to add value to our client relationships? Ensure automatic enrollment is in place if mandated in 2025. It should be already for any plan subject to it. But again, follow up with clients, especially if they're new to EACA. Let them know the best practice of getting an affirmative election from participants when they come on board if they don't want to have to deal with all the nuance of the EACA provisions. Make sure to have conversations with those businesses in states subject to mandates because that could potentially be a growth opportunity for your own book of business. Make sure you review the required and voluntary Secure 2.0 provisions and effective dates. And for voluntary provisions, again, just before you recommend any changes to a client, have a conversation with the record keeper and TPA in terms of what they can administer. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Stay up to date on the DOL cybersecurity guidance. I mean, they are literally handing you the information that you need to have these conversations with your clients in those 3 points of light documents. And then just make sure that participants are maximizing the opportunity in Roth contributions, especially for our younger participants and those in lower tax brackets, of course. I do think that there is a lot of potential value there, especially as it sort of gains more of a hold in the retirement plan industry. So with that, I think I'm just about out of time. It's about 2:30. So Noelle, I'll pass it back to you for any closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Kate, and that was a great presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's PENTalk. Just as a reminder, you will receive a link to this presentation tomorrow afternoon. We hope everyone has a great rest of the day.